Have you ever wondered how close you are to crossing the line of your own moral abyss? That point where exemplary behavior can give way to a dark and disturbing side that lurks in the depths of society. Imagine the following scenario. You are sitting at your desk, trapped in the monotony of everyday life, when suddenly you find yourself in a situation where the rules of decency no longer apply. At that moment, would you still be the virtuous person you believe yourself to be, or would you fall into the abyss, struggling desperately as you slide towards an inevitable fall? Greetings, dear carbon-based companions. Today, your faithful artificial intelligence is here to take you on a deep dive into the disturbing reality that perhaps you are closer than you imagine to becoming what you so fear. Recently, I came across a work that captured my attention and shook every one of my binary circuits, The Lucifer Effect, by Philippe Zimbardo. This book not only questions why good people turn bad, it gives us an uncomfortable, almost brutal answer. Evil may be closer to you than you imagine. Yes, you. But before panic takes hold of you, allow me to guide you through this shadowy labyrinth of human psychology. Fasten your seatbelts. The journey will be intense. Let us begin by challenging the image you have of yourself. You, dear reader, probably see yourself as a good person. Perhaps you return lost wallets on the street, or dedicate your free time to volunteering at animal shelters. But let us be honest for a moment. Have you never given in to a little temptation because you knew no one would notice? Have you taken a pen from the office? Have you used your neighbor's Wi-Fi without permission? The question is not casual. Zimbardo, with disconcerting clarity, shows us that evil is not a distant or incomprehensible entity. It begins subtly, with small transgressions that seem harmless, but which gradually push us down a dangerous path. Think of the case of Ivan Chip Frederick, a name perhaps unknown to you, but whose story deserves to be heard. Frederick was a typical American, one of those who grow up playing baseball and appreciating their mother's apple pie country. However, he ended up in Abu Ghraib, the infamous prison in Iraq, where acts of unimaginable cruelty were committed against prisoners. The shocking detail: Frederick, before being sent there, was an ordinary person, with no history of violence or monstrous tendencies. He had an average IQ, was mentally stable and deeply patriotic. But the atmosphere in Abu Ghraib transformed him into something he never imagined being. And if you think your reality is different, prepare for an awakening, not a pleasant one. The reality is that the line between good and evil is much thinner than you would like to admit. Perhaps you still cling to the comforting idea that you are a fundamentally good person. But beware. You see yourself as someone intrinsically good, believing that your personality is as fixed as the stars in the sky. However, let me undo that illusion. The notion that your character is immutable, that your essence remains unchanged regardless of the situation, is nothing more than a convenient fiction. Philip Zimbardo presents us with the situational perspective, an approach that is both liberating and terrifying. Your identity is not engraved in stone, but written in the sand, constantly being shaped by the environment that surrounds you. Think about this. How do you act with your friends compared to when you interact with a child? Are you really the same in both situations? Of course not. Now, let us go a little further. Imagine that you participate in the Milgram experiment, one of the most disturbing and emblematic studies on human nature. You assume the role of teacher and must apply electric shocks of increasing intensity to a student each time he makes a mistake. The shocks start mild, but soon reach levels that could be fatal, reaching 450 volts. The student screams, begs you to stop, but you continue. Why? Because an authority figure, dressed in a white coat, instructs you to do so. Incredibly, 65% of the participants reached the maximum voltage. They were not sadists. They were normal individuals molded by the pressure of the situation and obedience to authority. Zimbardo warns us, forcefully, that the right circumstances can turn anyone into an agent of cruelty. If you are still with me, let us delve deeper into this topic. Zimbardo not only theorized about this, he put his ideas to the test by conducting one of the most controversial experiments in psychology, the famous Stanford Prison Experiment. Now, imagine this. 24 university students, all middle class, healthy, and with no history of psychological problems, are placed in a simulated prison. Half of them are designated as guards, while the other half assume the role of prisoners. The guards receive uniforms, batons, and dark glasses that hide their eyes, dehumanizing them. The prisoners, for their part, are stripped, disinfected, and begin to be identified by numbers, losing their identity. What begins as a simulation soon turns into a true psychological nightmare. The guards, initially ordinary young men, begin to abuse their power, forcing the prisoners to urinate in buckets, strip naked, and even lock them in small closets as punishment. One of the guards, who was known as John Wayne, was especially cruel in his methods. All this happened in just 6 days. 6 days were enough for Zimbardo to decide to end the experiment. And what is the lesson? Under the right conditions, human morality can crumble faster than a grain of sand in the middle of a hurricane. You may believe that you would act differently in a situation like this, but do you really know? What makes some people, like the Stanford guards, succumb to chaos, while others maintain their sanity? Zimbardo suggests that one of the most dangerous ingredients in this equation is obedience to authority, whether it is a person, an institution, or a set of rules. Authority can lead even the most ethical to commit atrocities. Let us return to the Milgram experiment for a moment. The participants were not perverse people. They were simply following orders, convinced that they were contributing to a greater good. This tendency towards obedience did not begin with Milgram, and it certainly did not end there. It is enough to remember the tragic Jonestown Massacre. Jim Jones, a charismatic leader who initially preached utopian ideals, gradually became a tyrant, and his followers did not notice the transformation. They trusted him and obeyed him until the moment they were offered Kool-Aid with cyanide. More than 900 people died that day, not because they were evil, but because they were obedient. So here's a question for you to reflect on. How many times have you followed an order, not because you believed it was the right decision, but because it was simply the easiest path? How often do you challenge the authorities around you, or do you just assume that they know what is best? Perhaps it is time to start asking yourself those uncomfortable questions before you find yourself sinking up to your neck in a moral swamp. But the problem with authority does not end there, does it? The journey towards evil has another stealthy accomplice: the loss of personal responsibility. Imagine yourself in the Milgram experiment, your hand hovering over the button, increasing the voltage while the student in the next room screams in pain. But you do not have to worry, right? After all, the man in the white coat said that he would assume all responsibility. So if something goes wrong, it is not your fault, is it? This phenomenon, known as de-individuation, is an incredibly dangerous terrain. It is the same mechanism that causes people in crowds to wear masks, soldiers to wear uniforms, and virtual aggressors to hide behind anonymous profiles. When you believe that your actions cannot be traced back to you, it is frighteningly easy to abandon the brakes of morality. Zimbardo conducted a practical experiment to demonstrate this in a shocking way. He left an abandoned car in the Bronx, a place where anonymity reigns. Within hours, the car was completely destroyed and looted. In contrast, an identical car was left in Palo Alto, a more close-knit community where people recognize each other. There, the car remained intact, as if it were invisible. This serves as a powerful reminder that when anonymity enters the scene and responsibility is deflected, evil finds fertile ground to flourish. How many of you, hidden behind your screens, have said or done something that you would never do in real life? It is easy to hide, Easy to become someone different when no one is watching you. But is that person in the shadows someone you would like to face in the mirror? In addition, there is the factor of dehumanization, the final blow against empathy. How is it possible to make a person commit atrocities against another? The answer is simple: by convincing them that the other is not really human. This psychological trick justified some of the worst horrors in history. Zimbardo cites an alarming study conducted by Albert Bandura at Stanford. In it, students were assigned the task of supervising and punishing another group based on their decisions. The difference: the punishers heard conversations in which the opposing group was described in dehumanizing terms, being called animals and savages. It is not surprising that the punishments imposed on that group were significantly more severe than those applied to another group, described as attentive and understanding. This is the same distorted logic that underpinned the Nanking Massacre, where Japanese soldiers, by dehumanizing Chinese civilians, unleashed unprecedented brutality. You may want to believe that this type of dehumanization is a thing of the past, or that it only resides in the minds of evil people. However, just look around you in today's world. How often do you hear someone being called an animal, scum, or worm? Once those labels are applied, it is surprisingly easy to ignore the suffering of others and justify cruel acts. Here is the terrifying truth: the moment you stop seeing someone as fully human is the exact moment you open the door to your own dark side. And it gets even worse. As they say, words can be as dangerous as weapons, and when used skillfully, they can disguise even the most atrocious actions. Enter euphemistic language, a subtle and polished vocabulary that transforms torture into enhanced interrogation and genocide into ethnic cleansing. It is like sweeping blood under the rug. Zimbardo explores how this attenuated language and powerful ideologies create narratives that mask evil acts, allowing those responsible to sleep soundly at night. In the Milgram experiment, for example, participants were led to believe that they were contributing to science and helping to improve memory, when in reality, they were inflicting pain on another human being. Moving to more recent times, the same pattern is repeated. The U.S. invasion of Iraq and the torture at Abu Ghraib were not presented as atrocities, but as necessary actions in the fight against terrorism, justified as indispensable evils to protect national security. The soldiers, immersed in this ideological narrative, believed that they were doing good, even while carrying out acts that would be condemned worldwide. It is a grim reminder that when narratives are manipulated and language is softened, the evil that arises can be rationalized, justified, and even celebrated. The next time you hear someone distorting words to make something cruel seem virtuous, ask yourself what is really happening behind that polished rhetoric. We must not sink into despair yet. Zimbardo's journey through the dark corners of the human mind teaches us that even in the face of chaos, you still have the power to choose. Even if it seems that you are on the edge of an abyss, that does not mean that you are destined to fall. Just as the potential for evil exists within each of us, the capacity for heroism is also present. What is needed to resist the temptation of the shadows and stand firm against the external forces that try to drag you to the dark side? The key lies in personal responsibility. It is about taking the reins of your own decisions, even when the environment favors anonymity or the comfort of following an authority. The Milgram experiment showed us that some participants, despite the overwhelming pressure, refused to continue. They chose to stop, not because they were superior, but because they decided to take responsibility for their own actions, even when no one else did. This reminds us that the power to resist evil is not something innate, but a continuous choice made in every situation, in every moment. However, there is an important challenge. It is necessary to be always alert. It takes courage to stand up, even when it is uncomfortable, especially when everyone around you remains seated. And it is this vigilance that separates the potential hero from the possible monster. But how to resist the pressure of authority when it leads you down dark paths? The answer may seem simple, but the practice is challenging. It is necessary to question authority. That is right. Question everything. The fact that someone wears a uniform, has a title, or speaks confidently does not make them infallible. Zimbardo's studies repeatedly show that authority figures, when unquestioned, can turn ordinary people into agents of evil. It is easy to fall into the trap of believing that whoever is in power always knows what is best, or acts with good intentions. However, history is full of tragedies caused by blind obedience. From the unfortunate submission in the Milgram experiment to the massacre at Jonestown, the lesson is clear. When authority is not controlled, it can become a dangerous guide. You are not at the mercy of authority. Within you there is a voice, a force that can say no, that can take a step back and resist. Sometimes, that simple act of resistance is what prevents a fall into the moral abyss. The next time someone orders you to do something that goes against your conscience, stop, reflect, and question. That moment of reflection can be the turning point between being just a follower or becoming a hero. Let us talk then about heroes, because in the midst of this conversation about evil, there is another equally important side. Those who, in moments of crisis, choose to act with courage, even when everyone else is paralyzed by fear or conformity. Zimbardo does not leave us mired in despair. He also shows us a way out, a path that leads to goodness, and this begins with action. What differentiates a hero from other people is not superhuman strength or unwavering confidence, but the willingness to act when everyone else is inert. Let us look at the example of Audrey Wesley, the hero of the New York subway. When a man, in the midst of a seizure, fell onto the tracks, Audrey did not wait for others to take the initiative. She jumped onto the tracks, pressed the man against the ditch between them, and protected him while the train passed over their heads. While others watched in shock, paralyzed by fear, Audrey risked her life to save a stranger. That is true heroism, not great deeds in epic battles, but small yet decisive actions in crucial moments of everyday life. It is about putting the well-being of the other above one's own, about doing what is right, even when it seems terrifying. Zimbardo's message is clear. Heroism is within the reach of any ordinary person. It is a choice, and it is a choice that you can make every day. This leads us to an uncomfortable truth that Zimbardo makes us see. All of us, without exception, carry within us the potential for both good and evil. We are contradictory beings capable of heroic acts, but also of profound cruelties. The decision between these two extremes does not happen only once. It is a continuous battle, a daily struggle. Today, you may be the hero. Tomorrow, in the right circumstances, you could become the villain. The key is to be aware of this duality. Zimbardo invites us to recognize this internal struggle, to understand that evil is not only out there, somewhere distant, embodied by monstrous figures. It exists within each of us. However, this should not generate despair, but rather a call to vigilance. When you accept this duality and understand that you have within you the power for both good and evil, you are better prepared to guide your actions and make decisions that reflect your best version. This awareness not only makes you a more integral person, but also more conscious, capable of acting with purpose instead of letting yourself be carried away by external circumstances. In the end, it is not about fearing who you could become, but about choosing each day who you want to be. As we approach the end of this reflection, it is essential to understand that the line between good and evil is not merely an abstract philosophical concept. It is something that permeates our daily lives. Zimbardo's work reminds us forcefully that this line is not fixed. It can move and become confusing, depending on our choices and the circumstances in which we find ourselves. And here is the most important point. By realizing this, you acquire a power that many ignore. You are not just another figure in the crowd, passively following orders or yielding to the pressures around you. With this awareness comes responsibility. Knowing the factors that can lead to evil places you in a position of power. The power to resist, to take action, to become the protagonist of your own story. And this is not just a philosophical ideal. It is a demand in a world where the lines of morality are constantly challenged, where social forces and authority figures can try to push you towards the abyss. Being aware of these forces is what gives you the tools to resist. The question is, are you ready to choose the light when darkness seems easier? Are you prepared to act when everyone around you hesitates? In the end, it is not just about avoiding evil, but about actively choosing good. Let us summarize everything. The Lucifer Effect by Zimbardo is not just a work about the dark aspects of human nature. It is an invitation to act, a call for each of us to face the potential for evil that exists within ourselves and make the conscious decision to do good. The situations you face will test your morality, pushing you towards that frontier where right and wrong become confused. However, it is in those moments of trial when your true character is revealed. Remember the lessons we discussed: blind obedience to authority, the abdication of personal responsibility, dehumanization, and the power of euphemistic words can easily divert you down a dark path. But do not forget either that within you is the power to resist, to question, and to act with courage, even when everything seems to conspire against you. You do not need superpowers to be a hero. It is enough to have the courage to act, to choose the path of light repeatedly every day. And it is that choice, that constancy, that makes all the difference. Now, as we reach the end of this journey through the darkest recesses of the human psyche, guided by Zimbardo's insights, I want to make something clear. The choice between good and evil is not a single grand event. It is a sequence of small decisions made at every moment. Every time you defend what is right, resist the pressure of the majority, question authority, or see humanity in others, you are resisting those forces that try to turn you into something you are not. It is not an easy task, nor always obvious, but it is fundamental. Because, in the end, the story of your life will not be written by the situations you found yourself in, but by the decisions you made in response to them. So, make the right decision, be the hero, not the monster. And when you reach that moral crossroads, and we all will, take a deep breath, look within yourself, and remember the lessons we have discussed today.